Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining Tiffany and me. We are continuing our conversation on having the difficult conversation around race. Tiffany, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, Suman. Good morning. I am Tiffany Castagno. I am the CEO of Zephyr, and we're an HR consulting firm helping small business, nonprofit, and startups to build their infrastructures, their policies, program systems, and procedures. So I'm grateful to be here this morning in Pittsburgh.
Thanks, thanks Tiffany. And I'm Suman Kapur, CEO of Well Balanced Solutions. I help organizational leaders improve their communication and conflict management skills so they can have more productive team conversations. And Tiffany and I have been working on this little series on how to start and have difficult conversations around race. Last week, if you had joined us, Tiffany and I spoke about ways in which we can start these difficult conversations. And a lot of that conversation surrounded the creation of safe spaces. We talked about how safe spaces really do open that conversation. And some of the tips that we shared were how it was important to make it a priority and actually start the conversation. That's a really important thing when we're having these conversations around race. We talked about how we needed to make sure that we are accepting, understanding, and respecting that people are at different points in their journey. Some people might just be starting their journey. Everything that's been happening may have sort of lit the fire under them and said, I need to be a part of this and I need to be part of change. And other people may be in the middle or towards the end of their journey where they've done some of that self-thinking. We talked about how questions really need to come from a place of genuine curiosity and respect. And then lastly, we talked about self-care. This is a heavy topic. It's a heavy situation. We are in the midst of lots of change. It's scary. We are vulnerable. So we need to make sure we're being kind to ourselves, and that if it is a difficult moment, that we step away, that we really focus on self-care. And I know that there were a couple of call to actions, Tiffany. Would you like to share some of this stuff just sort of as a recap of things that we talked about last week?
Sure. So a lot of that goes right along with what you just shared, Suman. So when we talk about creating safe spaces, it's are you showing up? How are you showing up? Are you there for your team? Have you allowed space even on the meeting agenda?
Mhm.
So we talked about the little elephants in the room and how sometimes people just they don't talk about certain things. And race is one of those things that we encouraged you to talk about and to bring into the meeting and to come from a place of empathy. Having an agenda there to show up and be present, have empathy, and to understand that people are at a different place on their journey. So those were some of those important things as well. Having a voice, making sure you are courageous to use your voice, and hopefully you feel that. And again, Suman and I are here as a safe space if you need that, or if you need to know how to either start or continue these conversations. Working on yourself every single day, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but we are all works in progress on everything. And it's so important in these racially charged times to talk about, where you are on your journey and what are some of the things that you're committed to. So that's another call to action, commit to it. So you
Mhm.
by starting the conversation, that means you can't just drop the conversation. And so it's continuing that conversation as well. EAP, we talked about, that's a great one, especially that's my little shameless
Yes.
HR plug. The call to action to seek out those employer resources and make sure that you're utilizing those because they're free most of the time. That's what they're there for. They're a confidential resource for you to be able to utilize. Your HR department, your leader can help you talk to a friend, but making sure that you're leveraging that, you use your resources and have and create safe.
Yep, absolutely. Again, that's a great recap. Thanks for that. So,
Yeah.
at the end of last week, we talked that today's goal was to talk about and to share some of the comments and questions that people have passed along to us. I, for one, have had some really good conversations with people. some of them very vulnerable, and I thank people for reaching out to me. Some very difficult conversations about what's happening at workplaces, in homes, conversations with parents and spouses. And so this is exactly what we wanted to do, was to get people to start thinking about how do we have the conversations. So I wanted to thank everyone who sent in comments, sent in questions, for people who are reaching out to us. So thank you, because that helps us create these videos, and to create that safe space, which is our big goal. Um, in talking with Tiffany and sort of assessing the questions that were being asked, the biggest question that was out there is people saying that they want to have the conversation, but they're scared to have the conversation. They're scared that they're going to offend the person they're speaking to. You know, there's so much hate, not hate, there's a lot of tension and stress and frustrations and history behind the conversation around race. And understanding, again, that people are at different points in their journeys, but people are scared to have the conversations. So Tiffany and I thought it would be a great time for us to talk about how do we address those concerns and fears when we want to have the conversation. And that at the end of the day, the biggest thing to understand is it is scary to have these conversations, but in order to make them productive, you have to start by talking about what you have done to work on yourself, right? So if you want to have a conversation, it doesn't make sense to walk up to someone and say, hey, can I ask you a question? And ask questions that really you could have learned on your own. And I think that's the biggest frustration that people are having when having the conversations, is there are questions that you can look up, answer, and start working on yourself. So I think one of the best ways to form and to initiate that conversation is to say, hey, here are some of the things that I've done. I've read the books, I've read articles, I've done some self-reflection, I've considered the biases that I come in. You know, I've really done some deep thinking, and now I have some questions. Can we talk? So what do you think about that, Tiffany?
I think that it's like you were in my head. I definitely think that inward reflection, that's one of the top things that I wanted to hit on today, because it's so important. Again, none of us are without flaws, so we all need to constantly be working on ourselves. But what happens when you come to these conversations and you don't show up appropriately? You show up, maybe you're seeking the information, and that's okay, those curious questions, but there in all relationships there has to be kind of some give and take. And so reflecting inward and seeing, what is the work that I've done, how have I committed, how have I shown up, and what am I willing to do. Let's be honest, people are, unfortunately, I'm having some similar conversations to what you are, and I'll even hesitate, you corrected yourself, but there is hate, there is, right? That's how we got here. And so we have to be able to acknowledge, and that's another call to action that we had, is just to talk about that and acknowledge where you're at. Just like Suman said, where are you at? What are your biases? Being self-aware and reflecting enough, being open enough to say, okay, maybe I have some biases that I didn't realize I had, and I have to check that at the door. It's almost like creating a brand new foundation and baseline.
Yep, exactly. And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do, and it's scary to do. And I think that's another thing people need to acknowledge, that it is a scary thing that we're all trying to do here. But at the end of the day, the goal is all the same. It's creating systemic change. It's creating genuine equality. It's having that compassion and kindness for everyone across the world, but particularly people of color, because right now that's the focus that we're having. And so I think having the understanding that I have to work on myself, that's the biggest takeaway I think from today, is working on yourself genuinely. I have a friend who has taken this beyond serious. I am beyond amazed by everything that she is doing. She is really putting herself in a very vulnerable position for herself. And I'm so proud of her for the work that she's doing. she's journaling, she's reading, she's writing thoughts and ideas, she's having difficult conversations at work, at home. Um, and a lot of it is scary. Some of the conversations that she and I have, she was unaware of some of her biases that she brings on a day-to-day basis. And it woke her up and it scared her. But to create this conversation, that's a great point to say is, here's all the work I've done. I want to be better. Can we have that conversation?
I think, too, it's recognizing, as you're starting these conversations and as you're having these dialogues, it's recognizing how might what I am going to say land with someone. What is the impact? Because we talked about intent versus impact. And so sometimes
Mhm.
people don't intend any harm, and we always want to assume positive intent. And that's something we talked about last week as well. But sometimes just because you don't mean harm doesn't mean that you don't know necessarily where that person's at on their journey. So being mindful of how that may impact someone else is super critical too, because doing that and that mindfulness is what opens the door and what fosters healthy relationships. So it's not going in all crude and just kind of saying whatever, or trying to
Mhm.
meet your needs. It's meeting the needs and understanding that someone's going through a really tough time and that these are not easy conversations. That is how you open the door to having continued conversations.
Yep, I think that's a great point. It's not about the person who's approaching someone. It's about the other person. It's about the Black person that you're speaking to, the person of color, because you can't make it all about you. It has to be about them and the injustice that's happening. And I think once you move the energy from you onto them, that's another way to say that you are genuinely open to having the conversation, genuinely want to learn and help and become an ally. That's a phrase that's been thrown around over the last couple of weeks again. It's sort of come up, it's come up again, is how to be an ally. And these are the great ways to be an ally. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention before I forgot it in the thought process that I'm having is, even if you are ready to have the conversation, you've done all the work that you believe, and now you've got the questions, the person who you are going to speak to may not be ready for that conversation. So even if the individual says, you know what, today's not the day, I can't do it today, that's okay, right? Don't feel that that is the end of the conversation. Say, well, I tried and nobody wants to talk to me and I'm finished,
Great
right?
point. Great point.
And so that again is another bias. Don't say, well, I knew that was going to happen, so why did I put all the work in and what's the point? And I'm going to walk away. That's not, again, it's not about you. It's about what the other person is going through on that particular day. So while you might have come with the goal of having a conversation around race and the person says, I can't, I'm done, I really can't do it today, then the question should become, is there something we can talk about? What's going on? I'm here. I may not have the answers. I may not look like the person you want to speak to, but I'm here if you need to lean on me. And if you don't, I understand it and I respect it and I will go away, right? I think that's another conversation that has to happen. And then to follow that up with a check-in, right? So a couple of days down the road, you shoot them an email, hey, just checking in, is everything okay? And that again is coming from that genuine place of respect and curiosity. Someone has shut you down to have a conversation about this, and you can sense there was something more going on. It is absolutely appropriate and humankind to check in on that person.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about those little elephants that we keep pulling from, but
Yes.
don't, it's one of those things where we have to acknowledge. It's back to not leaving the elephants in the room, back to acknowledgement that there is an issue. There's a huge issue. It's a problem. Let's just call
Mm-hmm.
it what it is, and understand that people, I am exhausted, but I feel like it's my duty to continue to have these conversations. And I am so blessed that so many people are willing to walk through that door and to say, I don't even know what to say. I just want to be here for you. I want you to know that I care
Yes.
about you. I want you to know that I'm probably going to make some missteps, but I'm here for you. And I don't know. And admitting that you don't know
Yes.
That's always good practice, but admitting that you don't know, that makes you vulnerable, and that takes, maybe some defenses off on the other side, because it is emotionally draining. I'm going to be honest. And if we're talking about safe spaces, that means that, Suman and I are willing to be vulnerable here with you. It is exhausting. I've had many, many tears. I had tears again Monday night because of more things that are going on, because I don't understand it. But these are the conversations that need to happen so that we can impact change.
Yep, absolutely right. I mean, I think you've hit every point incredibly well because we are vulnerable. Everyone, and regardless of the color of their skin or where they are in a company, whether it's leadership team, at home, we are all vulnerable. And this is a very painful conversation. And like Tiffany said, this is why we wanted to do it. We wanted to create the safe space. We wanted to be there for people to comfortably come and have these conversations. And so I think that's great. What else did you want to point out, Tiffany? Anything else that we talked about? I
I
think
think
this was a nice short sort of conversation as a way to follow up last week's.
Yeah, I think just, like listening and making sure that you use your resources, just a reminder there, those would kind of be, some of those things that I would say, kind of as we wrap up here. I think that that's very important, and actively listening. I know that it's hard sometimes if we're super curious and we're like, but I just want to know more. I want to know more, and I want to get
Mhm.
to the next part. But being actively listening is key, and making sure you do use your resources. There's nothing wrong with asking someone, and maybe that person, like Suman said, it's not today's not the day, but still continue to walk through the door, because maybe they just had a really bad day that day, and maybe it's not even related to something like this. Maybe their car
Right.
broke down. So that empathy and listening is super critical.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. I think you're great. Those are some great points again. And so the idea with confronting that fear about not wanting to say the wrong thing. As a recap, I think it's just important that you work on yourselves first. That's the most important thing. Put the work in. And it's not until you've put the work in that you can then go and talk to someone. So that is the most important thing, whatever that work is. Reading the books. There's so many resources out there. Talking to your children about racism. Again, there's so many resources out there. There are movies out there. I know we've probably all watched many of these movies that are out there that talk about race. Um, Put that work in. Really confront yourself and do that hard work before you go and talk to someone, because that then makes you more open, makes the individual more open to wanting to have the conversation, because they know you're doing the work. They know you are now coming genuinely curious, genuinely wanting to be an ally. And so that sort of helps with that, making that conversation a bit easier, though it will still be very difficult.
Mm, yeah, these aren't easy conversations, but being intentional is
Yes.
how we become impactful.
Yep. And like we talked about, that day may not be the right day, and it's okay. Please continue to look for someone or a group of people who want to have the conversation. Don't feel shut down if one person was having a bad day or is not in the framework or wasn't open that particular day. Don't let that stop you from having conversations. Find the people. Tiffany and I are here, right? So we are we are ready to be vulnerable. We are ready to create the safe space. We hope we are doing that here. And so, if nothing else, reach out to one of us and we would be happy to have the conversations.
Yeah. And even, from a leadership perspective, we recognize that leaders have challenges with this as well. So
Mhm.
making sure that you're leveraging, that goes for employees and leaders alike. So leverage your resources, whether it's your boss or HR or EAP. It's not just for employees. So these are super important things that we want to share in this message today. Those are things that are.
Yep, absolutely. So going forward, I think we've got a number of action plans, which is just continuing to do the work, continuing to reach out to Tiffany and to me. We are hoping to go live next week. with addressing comments and questions that you all might have. And just as a way to continue this process and conversation, we don't know when we'll go live, but we will make sure that we give you all enough time to schedule and join us. We will definitely make sure we get enough information out as early as possible so you can plan to join us. So we are looking forward to continuing this conversation and hope you all will be part of our journey.
Yeah, yeah. So until next week, take care of each other and yourselves.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Tiffany.
Bye, take care.
Bye.